Have you ever heard of a place so horrifying that even the people who sent prisoners there refused to talk about it afterward? A place where thousands were dumped with no food, no shelter, and no hope until hunger turned humans into monsters. This is the story of Cannibal Island, one of the darkest, most forgotten secrets of the Soviet Union. It was the spring of 1933, deep within the Soviet Union. The world was in turmoil, and Stalin's USSR was tightening its grip on its own people. Amid the chaos of industrialization and political paranoia, one of the most chilling social experiments in history was about to unfold, one that would take place on a small, remote island in Siberia, known today as Nazino Island, or as history remembers it, Cannibal Island. The plan seemed simple on paper. The Soviet government wanted to clean up the streets of Moscow and other big cities, remove the so-called socially harmful elements. In other words, beggars, the unemployed, refugees, and anyone without an internal passport were seen as undesirables. These people weren't criminals. Many were just ordinary citizens who had lost their homes, their jobs, or their documents. But in Stalin's Russia, being poor could make you an enemy of the state. In May 1933, the police swept through the cities, rounding up tens of thousands of these undesirables. They were promised a new life, fertile land in Siberia, where they would build socialist settlements and start fresh. But what awaited them was not a new beginning. It was a death sentence. Trains packed with people starving, frightened and confused, rumbled eastward for days. There was no food, barely any water, and no medical care. Many didn't even know where they were being sent. After a long, freezing journey, around 6,000 people were finally offloaded on a small island in the middle of the Ob River in western Siberia. The island was swampy, full of mosquitoes, and completely uninhabitable. No shelter, no tools, no food. Just endless wilderness and the cruel silence of the Soviet guards watching them from the riverbanks. The first day, confusion reigned. People tried to organize. Some tried to build fires or make huts from branches. Others searched desperately for food. But there was nothing. Guards threw a small amount of flour onto the riverbank and told the prisoners to make bread. But how can you make bread without ovens, without pots, without even clean water? People mixed the flour with muddy river water and drank it raw. Within days, hundreds fell sick. Hunger, real, unimaginable hunger, began to take hold. Some prisoners tried to swim to the mainland to find food, but the icy river and guards' bullets stopped them. Others began stealing from the weak. Every night, the screams of the dying echoed across the dark island. And then, the unthinkable happened. When the flour ran out and no more supplies came, the starving people turned on each other. Witnesses later recalled finding bodies with missing limbs, flesh torn from bone. Some ate the dead. Others killed the living just to survive. One survivor described it chillingly. "We were hungry, so we cut off pieces of the dead. We had to eat, or we would die too." Even guards, hardened soldiers of the Soviet regime, were horrified by what they saw. But they didn't stop it. They just watched and waited. After several weeks, Soviet officials finally sent investigators to the island. What they found was beyond words. Out of the 6,000 people sent to Nazino Island, over 4,000 were dead, many from starvation, disease, or cannibalism. The survivors were skeletal, barely human, with wild eyes and trembling hands. The investigators were so disturbed that they filed a confidential report, one that would remain hidden for decades. They called it the Nazino tragedy. But in the USSR, such stories were forbidden. The Soviet government could not admit that one of its own resettlement projects had turned into mass death and cannibalism. So, the island's name was erased from maps, and witnesses were silenced. It wasn't until the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, that the truth finally emerged. Historians uncovered the documents, survivor testimonies, and reports buried deep in the archives. The tragedy of Cannibal Island reveals something far darker than just starvation or human cruelty. It shows what happens when a government dehumanizes its own people, when ideology becomes more important than life itself. These people were not criminals or enemies. They were victims of a brutal system that saw them as disposable. Imagine thousands of souls sent to die, not in war, not in rebellion, but in silence. And for decades, no one even knew they existed. What would you have done if you were there facing hunger, fear, and the collapse of humanity itself? Would you fight to survive or lose yourself in the darkness? Today, Nazino Island still exists, a quiet, overgrown patch of land in Siberia. There are no monuments, no graves, no signs of what happened there. Just the wind over the river and the ghosts of the forgotten. It's a reminder that history's darkest chapters are often hidden in plain sight and that the real monsters are not always born. Sometimes they are made by hunger, fear, and tyranny. What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more.